With the latest news this morning, President-elect Donald Trump says his charitable foundation will soon be no more. And he plans to do away with it, he says, in a move aimed at trying to avoid any conflict of interest. Rich Edson is live in Washington this morning with the very latest. So, Rich, first of all, why is the president-elect making this announcement now?
Good morning, Eric. And in less than a month, Donald Trump becomes president of the United States, and his transition team says he wants to avoid even the appearance of any conflict with his role as president. Though as his transition released that statement, the president-elect offered his Twitter followers one of his own explanations, writing, quote, "My wonderful son Eric will no longer be allowed to raise money for children with cancer because of a possible conflict of interest with my presidency. Isn't that a ridiculous shame? He loves these kids, has raised millions of dollars for them, and now must stop. Wrong answer. The media tries so hard to make my move to the White House, as it pertains to my business, so complex, when it actually isn't." The media has been asking how President-elect Trump will avoid conflicts as president with his multi-billion-dollar businesses. His transition team said Trump would announce earlier this month how he plans to separate his presidency from his business interests. The transition team delayed that announcement until next month. Eric?
Well, Rich, as you know, there's a lot of controversy over that. Meanwhile, the foundation is still under investigation.
Yeah, New York State Attorney General Eric Schneiderman's office says it is still investigating the Trump Foundation and says the president-elect cannot legally dissolve it until authorities finish that investigation. It's into how the foundation raises and spends its money and reports it spent charity money settling lawsuits for his for-profit businesses. In October, Schneiderman ordered the Trump Foundation to halt its fundraising because it failed to register with the state. Last month, Schneiderman's office announced a $25 million settlement over Trump University in a separate case, calling that entity a phony. Eric?
All right, Rich, pretty complicated, and it continues. Thanks so much. Patty Ann?
And joining us right now with more on that is Jamie Weinstein, senior editor for the Daily Caller. Thanks for joining us. So as we said, soon after Mr. Trump announced that he would dissolve the foundation, investigators said that would be illegal. New York's Attorney General Eric Schneiderman is probing the foundation, as we just heard, and his office gave a statement Saturday that said the foundation cannot legally dissolve until that investigation is complete. Mr. Trump says he's talking to his lawyers. What about all that?
Well, it looks like at least we signaled the intent of Donald Trump. We don't know what the legalese will be with the New York State Attorney General, whether he can or not. We haven't delved that far into it yet, but at least Donald Trump has signaled he wants to shut down the foundation, which is understandable. We have seen the problem of foundations in public life with the Clinton Foundation and all the problems and at least the appearance of scandal that came with that. Donald Trump's foundation is a much smaller foundation. It's in the millions, not the tens of millions, and he himself has not really given to the foundation in almost a decade. But it's been mired in some controversy as well, and it probably is smartest just to shut it down as he goes in the Oval Office. And that's what Donald Trump wants to do. We'll see what the New York State Attorney General has to say about that, but we know his intent now.
Yeah. The role of his children has become an issue. For example, Trump's daughter Ivanka had planned to auction off a coffee with herself for charity. That had to be dropped. Ethics experts said it looked like bidding for access. And we just heard Mr. Trump's tweet about his son Eric. Now he can't raise money for kids with cancer. Where do you draw the line? Can these public officials try to do some good with their influence without running into these problems?
Well, it's very difficult, and obviously people elected Donald Trump knowing his web of business interests and charitable interests. He should do, I think most experts say, the best he can to separate himself from those conflicts of interest. To date, some people have criticized still having some of his children in transition meetings, which kind of doesn't have that fine separation between his business and public life. But the reality is there's no easy answer. Some people want him to sell all his business interests. That might get a very low price if he did on a fire sale. But alternatively, you might have people criticize foreign governments, sovereign wealth funds might come in and pay a very high price and then say, well, there you have another conflict of interest. So it's not that easy to decouple Donald Trump from his business interests any way you cut it. People elected Donald Trump knowing what those business interests are. So there's only so much Donald Trump can do to make that wall of separation.
Right. But you you make an important point, which is that Mr. Trump's critics are saying it's not just the foundation. The foundation's just the beginning. The DNC communications director, Eric Walker, saying shuttering a charity is no substitute for divesting from his for-profit businesses and putting the assets in a blind trust. So what to do about that? You know, there are critics who say even a blind trust wouldn't be enough, especially the way he's thinking about doing it, which is by putting his children in charge. He said he would announce a new plan on December 15th. That has been postponed. What is the best course for those more than 300 businesses that he's involved in?
Yeah, I just don't think there's an easy answer. As people have noted, a blind trust, Donald Trump still knows what real estate holdings he has. It's not like the stock market where you can sell all your holdings, put it in a blind trust, allow a financial advisor to pick a blend of stocks that you don't know what are in it. You know, it's pretty clear which properties are in the Trump family business. It's the ones labeled Trump, you know, Trump hotels, Trump golf courses. So it's not all that easy. I think that you know, he has to do something to try to separate and detangle himself from the business. But, you know, people elected him knowing what he held and what his businesses are. It's not going to be so easy to make this clear separation between business and the presidency.
And back again to the foundation. During the campaign, Mr. Trump referred to the Clinton Foundation as a criminal enterprise. As we heard from Rich Edson, now people are accusing Mr. Trump of diverting funds from his charity to pay off his settlements, etc. How difficult is it to run a charity without it becoming pay for play or this commingling of funds?
Well, I will say that, you know, the Trump Foundation is a little different. I mean, I don't know how easy it is, but there were some odd things that were going down at the Trump Foundation. Again, Donald Trump has not donated to the Trump Foundation, his personal foundation, in almost a decade. Most of the money was from the Vince McMahon and the WWE. They donated the bulk of it, $5 million over the last 10 years. And Trump did use that money to buy a portrait of himself, to settle some of legal problems that he had. So it was a bizarre foundation. I think it's probably smart of him to shut it down to avoid any other problems going forward with the Trump Foundation, so he can focus on the business at hand, which is running the country.
And that's exactly why he says he wants to do this. We'll see whether he's able to with this ongoing probe. Jamie Weinstein, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Well, Patty Ann, you know, it came as a shock to many of us of a certain age from the pop tunes of the 1990s. And now this morning, tributes pouring in for George Michael. He, of course, was an 80s pop icon. He passed away yesterday at the age of only 53 years old. And today, fans are gathering outside of his home in North London to pay tribute and respect. Will Carr is live in Los Angeles with the very latest. You know, Will, it was pretty much of a shock, especially at that young age. What else do we know about George Michael's death this morning?
Yeah, that's right. Good morning, Eric. From all accounts, his death seems like a major surprise. His publicist says that he hadn't been sick. Authorities say the death is unexplained but not suspicious. And while it appears that he had a heart attack, in a statement his publicist said it's with great sadness that we can confirm our beloved son, brother, and friend George passed away peacefully at home over the Christmas period. This morning, British paper headlines read, 80s poster boy, tormented pop icon. He sold more than 100 million records throughout the course of his career, first finding initial success as part of the music duo Wham, then later launching his debut solo album, Faith.
'Cause I gotta have faith. I gotta have.
In the course of his career, Michael won 2 Grammys, had 8 #1 hits on the Billboard Hot 100, and aside from his singing career, drug use and his sex life kept his name in the headlines. It also led to several brushes with the law over the years, but certainly not what his fans are concentrating on this morning. Instead, they're leaving flowers outside of his home while they're remembering a pop legend. Eric.
Well, certainly also this morning, social media must be exploding.
Yeah, absolutely. Really an outpouring of support. Ellen tweeting, I just heard about my friend George Michael's death. He was such a brilliant talent. I'm so sad. Rob Lowe said, had the pleasure of knowing George Michael in the 80s, voice of an angel. Now he can sing with them. And Elton John tweeting, I'm in deep shock. I have lost a beloved friend, the kindest, most generous soul, and a brilliant artist. R.I.P. George Michael. Eric, George Michael was 53 years old.
Yeah, we see right now live in North London outside of his home, fans and other well-wishers placing flowers and notes and letters, as often happens in Oslo this year. Pretty remarkable when you consider that there's been a litany and a list of several pop superstars who have passed away below the age of 70.
Yeah.
George Michael, our thoughts are with his family. And for those of us, as I said, of a certain age, really a soundtrack from the 1980s and the tunes of our lives.
Yeah, great hits. Well, tensions are rising between the U.S. and a key ally. Israel's prime minister lashing out at the Obama administration following a vote at the United Nations. We'll tell you what set him off. And President Obama gearing up to issue more executive orders during his final days in office. How will his last-minute moves affect his legacy?
I think President Obama is beginning to figure out that his legacy is like one of those dolls that as the air comes out of it, shrinks and shrinks and shrinks. And that 60 or 70% of his legacy is executive orders, almost all of which will be repudiated by Trump. The things he's done this week can be turned around. It takes a little bit of legalized, smart lawyers, but they'll turn it around. And he's in this desperate frenzy. What he's actually doing is he's setting up a whole series of things to distract Trump, which will make his liberal allies feel good about Democrats and hate Republicans when Trump rolls them all back.
That's former House Speaker Newt Gingrich, the vice chair of the Trump transition team, taking aim at the flurry of executive actions that are now being issued by President Obama in his final weeks in office. As you heard, the former speaker suggesting, in his view, the president's moves are, quote, a desperate frenzy to try and basically cement his legacy before leaving office. But Mr. Gingrich is claiming it's no use because most of those executive orders will be undone by President-elect Trump when he takes office. Doug Schoen, former advisor to President Bill Clinton and Fox News contributor, joins us. Adam Goodman, Republican strategist and principal of the Victory Group. Welcome to you both. Doug, let me start with you.
Thank you.
You know, the former speaker says 70% of the Obama policies will be reversed by President Trump. Is his legacy in danger?
Yeah, I think it is, with Obamacare obviously up for repeal and replace, or repeal and delay. I think the decision of the UN is certainly something that doesn't reflect the incoming Trump administration's position. I am certain the initiatives on coal and on offshore drilling will also be reversed by the incoming president. So I think Speaker Gingrich is correct in assuming that the bulk of what has been proposed recently, and even things like the executive order on the Dreamers, I think that too faces the prospect of being rolled back.
So, Adam, I mean, if he's doing some of this in these final few weeks, I mean, is it for naught?
Well, let's go back into a little bit of history. There's something called separation of powers, Eric, that was popularized by a French philosopher by the name of Montesquieu. And he basically did this because he said we need to have a sense of virtue about the governing over the governed. And what we see right now is a president who has issued executive orders and rules of authority at the pace of more than one a week. And they're going to be a lot of these are going to be undone, but some of these were totally, absolutely wrong. Giving legal status to 4.3 million illegal aliens. The Paris Accords, which was really a treaty where the U.S. Senate is the only one that's really empowered to give that power of treaty. And you have a president who is willfully and constantly trying to assert his ideas and his power over the American public. And if we don't like it, so be it. This is a worrying precedent when you think about moving ahead. And I think, you know, Donald Trump is not only going to overturn much of this, which I think Newt Gingrich is certainly on point there. But I think we have to take a deep look into whether or not we really believe in the three branches of government or not. And that's what's going to be more importantly on display moving forward.
Well, Adam, you make a great point. Did the president make a strategic mistake by issuing all these executive orders? I mean, he told NPR that if he had gone through the legislative process, as you say, they would have been harder to undo. Now, all you need is a pen to reverse his decisions.
Eric, it's a great question. Look at what the president said. After the 2010 midterms, where the Democrats took a shellacking, he said, whether Congress likes it or not, I'm going to go ahead and move forward. He said it again in 2014, the State of the Union speech, that he'll do whatever and whatever it takes, wherever he needs to go, to assert his authority. This is not what the Founding Fathers envisioned. And now you might say he's paying the price for this, as not only a lot of his own executive actions will be overturned, but I think his legacy itself is now in danger of being seen as the acts of a person who decided to assert his own beliefs and values over those of the nation.
You know, Doug, he's a constitutional lawyer, Harvard Law professor, right, this sort of thing. But I mean, was this really a fatal mistake in his platform by ignoring Congress and issuing these executive orders?
This was a practical decision, Eric. He knew he couldn't get the bulk of what he's proposed and what Adam discussed and what I outlined through the Congress, so he did it by executive order.
I mean,
Our system
it may be
does
practical,
allow him to do it.
But it may be practical, but go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say it's practical, but clearly wrong, because as Adam suggests correctly, they will be reversed. But he was laying down a marker. Speaker Gingrich is right. He was letting the left know where he stands. I think it's regrettable, but he made what he thought was the only decision he could, and the bulk of his actions will be rolled back almost certainly, many within days.
And finally, what do you think his legacy will be, Doug? Let me start with you. I mean, first African-American president, a giant leap forward for this country. But take a look at the record in terms of your party. Senate seats down 16%, House seats down 24%. Now the Democrats lost the Senate and the House. Governorships down by almost half. State legislatures down for the Democrats by almost half. How will he be remembered?
Well, I think he had hoped that Obamacare would be his legacy, but with the defeat of Secretary Clinton, that's very much up for grabs. And given our weakness on the global stage, I think leading from behind and all that follows from that will also be a cross that he will have to bear politically and substantively going forward. So I think his legacy is up for grabs, which is one of the reasons he's doing what he's doing. And frankly, I think it isn't how we want to govern, even if it is constitutionally permissible.
And Adam, your view of his legacy?
Well, I agree with Doug. I think the jury is out on his legacy. But I think what's really instructive is to remember the remarks of Michelle Obama about a week ago when she was talking to Oprah and talked about the ushering in of an era of hopelessness. I think the biggest judgment is going to be whether or not that sense of hopelessness is what marked the 8 years of President Obama. Hopefully, God willing, to be followed by a period of great hope and achievement in this country under President Trump.
All right, Adam and Doug, thanks so much for joining us. And
Thanks
Doug,
so very much.
Enjoy Miami.
I will, and let's hope that Adam's right. I think on the Christmas week we have to pull for the new president.
All right, gotta go. Thanks.
Whatever our party.
Okay.
All right, tough talk about President Obama's handling of the war on terror. Rudy Giuliani saying the effort is lackadaisical. That ahead.
Your brain. Over decades, American administrations and Israeli governments have disagreed about settlements. But we agreed that the Security Council was not the place to resolve this issue. As I told John Kerry on Thursday, friends don't take friends to the Security Council.
Israel's prime minister pushing back after the United Nations abstained from a UN resolution calling for an end to Israeli settlement construction in the West Bank. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu summoning the U.S. ambassador to discuss that move. Kristen Fisher is live in Washington. Hi, Kristen. Where do the two countries stand this morning?
Well, we're hearing two totally different stories from the White House and the Israeli government. The White House says it had nothing to do with this UN resolution. Quote, the U.S. did not draft this resolution, nor did the U.S. introduce this resolution. The Egyptians, in partnership with the Palestinians, are the ones who began circulating an earlier draft of the resolution. But the Israeli government says that is flat out false.
We have rather ironclad information from sources in both the Arab world and internationally that this was a deliberate push by the United States, and in fact they helped create the resolution in the first place. And so it's deeply disappointing that this has been the path of President Obama.
Now, that was a spokesman for Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, who on Thursday told Secretary of State John Kerry, friends don't take friends to the Security Council. But the next day, instead of using its veto power, the U.S. abstained from a Security Council vote, which allowed this resolution to pass, a resolution condemning Israeli settlements in the West Bank. The Israeli government believes a vote to abstain is a vote against Israel, which is why the Prime Minister has now taken the relatively rare move of summoning the U.S. ambassador. Patty Ann?
Well, meanwhile, President-elect Trump is weighing in. What's his response?
Well, Mr. Trump was against this resolution to begin with, and he said so before it passed. Then, once it did pass, he took to Twitter to denounce it. Quote, "The big loss yesterday for Israel in the United Nations will make it much harder to negotiate peace. Too bad, but we will get it done anyway." He also said things will be different after his inauguration, and that is exactly what the Israeli Prime Minister is now banking on. Patty Ann?
All right, Kristen Fisher, live in Washington. Thank you.
Well, famous people acting badly. Why do they do that? Well, this stretches all the way from politics and big business to the Summer Olympics. Remember that? Well, Martha McCallan will take a look back at 2016, the year in scandal.
That will be fun. And as the world reels from a series of terror attacks, has President Obama taken the right approach? Lieutenant Colonel Ralph Peters on that next. As President Obama prepares to leave office, there is debate about his legacy on many issues, including fighting terrorism. Critics say he has fallen short. Former New York City Mayor Rudy Giuliani said in a radio interview, quote, "The kindest thing I can say is he has a lackadaisical attitude about it. He refuses to say radical Islamic terrorism." Well, Ralph Peters is a Fox News strategic analyst. Thank you for joining us.
Patty Ann, happy St. Stephen's Day.
Thank you. Same to you. Well, Mr. Giuliani spoke on a talk radio show hosted by John Katsimatidis. He said, "We've seen an increase in terror attacks on U.S. soil during the Obama administration." Is he right when he says that policy changes initiated by this administration have allowed terrorist attacks that might have been stopped under earlier policies?
I don't think he's right about the domestic scene. Our domestic intelligence and law enforcement agencies have really done an amazingly good job, if you think about it. We haven't seen another 9/11 level plot or anything even approaching it, really. And inevitably, some terrorists will get through. Now, Obama could have done a better job, but where you really have to fault the outgoing president is on his disastrous approach to the Middle East, which I can bluntly sum up in 6 words, which is praise Islam, ignore Christians, blame Jews, as we just saw with this scandalous debacle at the UN. So I think the president's willful naivety about Islam, his refusal to accept the fact that within Islam there are elements that are distorting the religion badly and killing Muslims as well as Christians and everybody else, his inability to act decisively, even the decision to go after bin Laden in Pakistan, it took weeks for him to make up his mind about that. The special operators are getting very impatient. So this idea of dawdling, indecisiveness, romanticizing Islam based on his childhood years in Indonesia, it all came up to this heady brew that created the power vacuum and allowed the Middle East, which when George Bush left office was convalescing, Iraq was convalescing, the Middle East was relatively quiet, Al-Qaeda was broken, and now 8 years later we see a conflagration across the Middle East, Iran and Russia on the ascendant, 500,000 dead in Syria. All of this does tie directly into terrorism, and I think the president's failures, his myriad failures, Patty Ann, mean that terror is going to be with us, Islamist terror is going to be with us even longer than it had to be.
You referred to it somewhat in what you just said. Mr. Giuliani slammed President Obama for refusing to use the term radical Islamic terrorism, and he did go on to say that Mr. Obama has a lackadaisical attitude about fighting terror. Lackadaisical, what do you make of that?
Well, it's a 5-syllable word that doesn't really apply. You want 5 syllables, I'd give you disingenuous. But better words, I think, are really futile, indecisive, pandering. The bottom line is, and I think the intent of the mayor was right, he just chose the wrong word. The bottom line is, this is an ineffectual president with effete policies. He's Hamlet. He's always been to be or not to be, wringing his hands, can't make up his mind. And the result, again, is in Syria alone, 500,000 dead.
Well, and yeah,
one hopes for improvements.
Yeah, regarding the Syrian refugee crisis, Mr. Giuliani said the goal should not be resettling refugees in Western countries, but rather to create conditions that allow them to return to their homeland. He suggests setting up a no-fly zone in Syria and sending back the people who have fled amid terrorism. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, Patty Ann, a no-fly zone and other actions in the first year of the Syrian uprising would have been decisive. Assad would be gone. But remember, Obama drew red lines. He just and then let it slide by. The rule in conflict is that the sooner you act decisively, the less bloodshed there is. And you know, when we opened this, I said to you, Happy St. Stephen's Day. That's the day. This is the day of the celebration of the first Christian martyr. And my perhaps biggest personal grief with President Obama is that he has utterly ignored the concluding phases of the destruction, the annihilation of 2,000 years of Christian culture in the Middle East. He won't even give priority to Christian refugees who have nowhere else to go. So I think this is a president who has been a prisoner of far-left ideology, came into office disliking Israel, came into office convinced that the United States was guilty, that the terrorists really, on some level, had a legitimate grievance, even though he didn't approve their actions. And I think we're going to look back on this 8 years as the 8 years that ravaged the world in such a way that we've not seen such a tragedy since the 1940s.
Well, that's a sad statement. Mr. Giuliani, of course, co-chairs Donald Trump's transition team. He says the president-elect has the right ideas regarding terrorism. He says Donald Trump sees this as a war, and he's going to deal with it that way. What specifically would you like to see Mr. Trump do? And do you agree with Mr. Giuliani that it's going to be a very different tone?
Well, I think it will unquestionably be a different tone. It'll be a much stronger tone. And it is, words are important. The pen's not mightier than the sword, but words matter. And just calling radical Islam or extremist Islam what it is makes a difference. Now, as far as what concrete measures we'll see on the ground, the situation has deteriorated so badly in Iraq and Syria that essentially our aircraft, our combat aircraft, are now they're working for Iran and Putin and Russia in the long term. Because when ISIS is smashed, and it will be, although it will live in various forms elsewhere, when it's smashed, it will leave Syria in charge of the Assad regime in charge of Syria, under the aegis of the Russians and influenced by the Iranians. When we finish in Iraq, in Mosul, and ISIS is broken there, Iran is the hegemon in the region. And because of, and this matters, the grand strategic picture, because President Obama dealt in bits and pieces, doing as little as he can, trying to measure out action by the teaspoonful, the next president, the incoming president, inherits a world in which Iran has a new empire stretching from Iran west of the Mediterranean. Russia is now the dominant player in the upper Middle East. We are excluded. And our power, and even our friends don't think they can trust us anymore. So the new president is going to have a great deal on his plate. He's got to deal not just with terrorism in the Middle East, but with the ascendancy of powers hostile to us, and that includes not only Iran, but the implacable hostility of Vladimir Putin. It's a very complex problem, and we can only wish the new president well.
Yes, absolutely. Lieutenant Colonel Ralph Peters, thank you as always.
Thank you, Patty Ann.
And you know, St. Stephen, by the way, is considered the first Christian martyr stoned to death in 36 AD. It's an official holiday in Ireland, Germany, and a bunch of other countries, too. Ralph Peters. Well, as this year draws to a close, there was no shortage of embarrassing headlines, as there always seem to be. Among them, corporate executives, politicians, even Olympic athletes, all shocking us with outrageous behavior. Martha McCallum now takes a look back at some of the scandals of this year.
2016 was a year filled with scandals and unbelievable headlines, from former Congressman Anthony Weiner's sexting to sex scandals at a popular Christian university. It was an unforgettable year in many ways. You can call it Watergate. Gold medal Olympian Ryan Lochte claimed that he was robbed at gunpoint after a night out in Rio de Janeiro. Turned out he allegedly urinated outside a gas station. City in the country has been plagued by allegations that it failed to handle cases of sexual assault committed by its students. Former Baylor president Ken Starr and celebrated football coach Art Briles lost their jobs. And the saga of Jelena. Justin Bieber posting an Instagram accusing his believers of attacking his relationship with Sofia Richie. Former girlfriend Selena Gomez took to the comments to retort, "If you can't handle the hate, then stop posting pictures of your new girlfriend, LOL." After Bieber deleted his Instagram to avoid the fray, Gomez relented, posting a Snapchat that read, "What I said was selfish and pointless," she said. Former New York Congressman Anthony Weiner in trouble again this year. It started when his former wife, Huma Abedin, said that she was leaving him after finding out that he was sexting with another woman. Mr. Weiner sent a lewd photo to the woman with his 4-year-old son in the picture. An FBI investigation also uncovered new emails related to the Democratic presidential candidate Hillary Clinton, putting a jolt into her presidential campaign. Wells Fargo CEO John Stump stepped down after the bank came under fire for their sales practices. In September of 2016, the company agreed to pay $185 million to settle allegations that accounts were opened without customers' permission to reach aggressive sales targets. And the maker of EpiPen, Mylan, agreeing to pay $465 million to settle allegations that it overbilled Medicaid for the life-saving drug. The House grilled the pharmaceutical company's CEO, Heather Bresch, about the controversial price hike after Bresch allegedly received a raise of more than 670% over 9 years. So that's 2016, and with 2017 right around the corner, no doubt there will be more of these scandals in the news. We'll be here to cover all of it for you. I'm Martha McCallum, Fox News.
All right, Martha, thanks. And let's hope she's wrong about that.
Yeah, I know. You wouldn't behave badly.
Absolutely not.
I think the award goes to Anthony Weiner. It's got it. Repeat offender.
Yeah, some of those were amusing, but most of them were just pretty upsetting, actually.
Yeah, really sad.
Well, the prosecution in the Robert Durst murder case says witnesses are scared to testify with good reason. We'll tell you their solution to the problem coming up.
Well, searchers are scouring miles of ocean after that Russian military plane that was headed to Syria. Well, it went down in the Black Sea. What they think did go wrong.
As we know, the main versions so far do not include an act of terrorism. So we think that the reason for the crash could be a technical fault or a pilot error.
A new record for sailing around the world. Frenchman Thomas Colville set off on his journey 49 days ago. Colville sailed alone, starting from an island in the English Channel. It was his third attempt to beat the previous record of 57 days.
And now to the latest on Robert Durst. Los Angeles prosecutors are warning that the real estate heir is a danger to witnesses in the latest murder case against him. So they want to videotape those witnesses' testimony in case they pass away before the trial gets underway. So is he a threat? Ken Zimmerman is a National Law Journal contributor, former general counsel. Deborah Blum, a criminal defense attorney, and both join us. Welcome. Ken, let me start with you. He's 73 years old. He's in a wheelchair. He's in jail. He's frail. So what are they afraid of, or is this overreach?
But Eric, this is a guy who's worth $100 million, accused of multiple murders. He actually admitted in a former allegation that he killed his roommate
in the English Channel. It was his third attempt.
He got off. So this is an unpredictable defendant. Hard to know what's going to happen. I think in all likelihood, though, the witnesses will testify. Testimony has tentatively been scheduled for February 14, so I think the testimony is likely to go ahead.
So what do you think will happen? I mean, there's going to be a hearing in another week or so. You think the judge will agree?
Well,
I think go ahead.
Sorry.
Okay, Deborah, go ahead.
I think that if the judge allows this to occur, it could set the stage for violating Robert Durst's Sixth Amendment's right to confrontation at trial. You could say what you want about him, but he is entitled to a fair trial, which is a fundamental principle of our criminal justice system. These people, there are no known threats to them. We just have their fear. So, you know, the prosecution is saying that Robert Durst is a force to be reckoned with despite his old age, but they're doing things that are making this a public trial before the trial. They released his videotape confession or interrogation, which is subject to future suppression, and they're now making a public issue of this, so they're poisoning the jury pool.
Well, I mean, the jury hasn't even been seated. I mean, Deborah, what if they do videotape the people and the people survive and they go up on the stand? Wouldn't that testimony, be legitimate and fair, and the jury would be instructed not to pay any attention to allegedly was videotaped before?
Well, they should have presented these witnesses in the grand jury, which is the proper channel for their testimony, because then that prior testimony would be sworn to in an official setting, and it would be subject to cross-examination based on prior inconsistent statements. This is a very unorthodox approach.
Well, Ken, there is a point. That huge documentary. Everyone knows about Morris Black, his former roommate, whose head was found, or I guess the head wasn't found. His body was decapitated. You've got Susan Berman, his very close friend, and the allegations or speculation are that he may have told Susan about the disappearance of his ex-wife many years ago. Susan, the Los Angeles writer, very well known. It's all out there anyway, so how do you get a jury to try to, give Robert Durst a fair trial, especially when you have this?
I think you're right, Eric. There's evidence mounting, kind of coming at Durst from all sides. Also, as you know, the interview was released that he gave the LA police shortly after being captured in New Orleans. And in that interview, he admitted he was on the run from the law. He admitted he doesn't think he's a very good guy. He admitted that he thought he's not a very good fugitive. And I think he's going to have a problem, whatever happens next. I think it's very unlikely he's ever going to see the light of day as a free man again.
Is what he told is that actually, does the jury would that be allowed in his trial?
Well, I think.
Go ahead, Ken.
Yeah, I think likely it's going to be admissible. He was read his Miranda rights by an LAPD detective before he gave the statement. He was told, what you say could be used against you in court. He said he understood. And then he went ahead and gave the interview. And typically after a defendant is Mirandized when he's in custody, usually what he says then can come in. So I expect it likely to come in before the jury when we get to trial.
And Deborah, how will that impact a potential jury?
Well, I think that the defense will have to do their job and argue that he said it while he was under the influence of drugs, which has been previously mentioned. And also, I want to focus on the fact that they have a witness who's 85 years old, and the prosecution is trying to create a hearsay dying declaration type of exception where they're trying to get in testimony of witnesses which will not be subject to cross-examination.
And that's Dr. Albert Cooperman, who's 85 years old. Final thought, very quickly. What do you think is going to happen, Deborah?
I think that the witnesses will testify, but I do agree with Kent that most likely the videotape interrogation will come in.
And Kent?
Yeah, I agree with that. Here's a little bit of a curveball, Eric. I actually think they're setting up a possibility where they're going to say he's not fit to stand trial. You see it coming with the pink wheelchair, the neck brace. Durst says he's goo-goo gaga in his words, in his statements, and I think the evidence is closing in, and they might just say he can't stand trial. He's not fit.
That's fascinating. Yeah, that could make potential sense. Kent and Deborah, thank you for your insight. We'll see what happens next week.
Happy holidays.
You too. Patty Ann?
Well, a nation in mourning after a Christmas Day tragedy. What Russia is saying about the possible cause of the military plane crash into the Black Sea.
And a Christmas storm in the desert caused lots of problems. Look at that, on the road.
We're happy and we're making silly faces and we're singing Christmas songs to get the time going.
Yeah, no, I don't know. I just waiting. That's all I can do, right? Okay.
Well, man, oh man, heavy snow hammering parts of Arizona, as you can see there. A powerful storm made its way through the state. 14 inches of snow fell in the Flagstaff area. But the gift of a white Christmas also causing lots of problems on the roads. There were reports of multiple car crashes and road closures around northern Arizona, as well as a lot of people getting stranded in their vehicles. The heavy snow shutting down the east and westbound lanes of Interstate 40. That, of course, forced drivers to take alternate routes, so always have some extra water and food in your car.
Absolutely, yeah. Well, Russian rescue teams are finding fragments of the military jet that crashed into the Black Sea shortly after takeoff, with 84 passengers and 8 crew members on board. The Kremlin is now pointing to a mechanical failure or pilot error, not terrorism, as the most likely cause of the crash. Kitty Logan has the latest developments. She's live in London. Hi, Kitty. What can you tell us first about the recovery effort?
Yes, well, the search for the remains of that plane is continuing off the coast near the Russian town of Sochi. Now, the Russian Defense Ministry says 3,500 people and 45 ships are involved in that operation. It's a massive effort. The priority now to find the flight recorders and to recover bodies. Now, divers have already found fragments of the plane's fuselage, and they've recovered 11 bodies so far. 60 members of the famous military choir, the Alexandrov Ensemble, were among the passengers. Their members now reduced by a third as a result of this tragedy. People have been laying flowers and lighting candles outside the musicians' Moscow headquarters. The choir had been heading to Syria to perform a concert for troops. And Vladimir Putin, the Russian president, has today declared a national day of mourning to remember all those on board who died. Patian.
Well, Katie, what are they saying meanwhile about what might have caused the crash now?
Well, of course, authorities are still investigating, and they say they're looking into a number of options which could have caused the crash. But today, the Russian transport minister said there's no reason to suspect that this was an act of terror.
We think that the reason for the crash could be a technical fault or pilot error, but it will be clarified by the Ministry of Defense Special Commission.
Now, investigations say they're looking closer at a number of possible causes, including poor fuel quality or a foreign object in the engine. Now, this type of Soviet-era military plane has been involved in a number of crashes in the past, but of course we'll have to wait until they find those black boxes before we learn more about what caused this particular crash. Patian.
All right, Kitty Logan reporting live. Thank you.
Oh, did you hear about this? The White House press secretary scolding the media for their coverage of President Obama. What Josh Earnest says the media folks keep getting wrong.
Also, Donald Trump says he now wants to avoid conflict of interest by dissolving his charitable foundation. Will it work? Will it be enough?